Welcome to the Good Growth Podcast, brought to you by BGF, the most active equity investor in the UK and Ireland. In this episode, host Jimmy McLaughlin is joined by Clare Roberts, founder and CEO of Kids Planet. Clare explains her motivations for founding Kids Planet after the birth of her first child, why she pursued a buy and build growth strategy from the outset, and how she ensured employee well-being has remained top priority as the company scaled.
Can you tell us your name and company?
Yes, I'm Clare Roberts and I'm CEO of Kids Planet Nursery Group.
And can you give us a bit of an idea of the scale of Kids Planet now?
So Kids Planet is 190 children's nursery schools and about 20 before and after school clubs as well.
And how many people do you employ?
Somewhere over 5,500.
That's quite a number. Talk to us, though, go right back to the beginning and tell us about your kind of founding values and the story, the origin story behind Kids Planet.
So Kids Planet's nearly 16 years old. I'm a mum with 3 daughters and my oldest daughter is 16. So I was looking for childcare when I was pregnant, and I live in a village and couldn't really find anything that was suitable for me in terms of flexibility and the times that they opened. I had a job where I travelled a lot, which I loved in the pharmaceutical industry. And I think it sort of became more evident as time went on that I wasn't going to be able to do the job that I did to the best of my ability. I probably could have done it for a bit, but I was in sales, and obviously sales, you have to keep being a good salesperson still. So I took voluntary redundancy when Izzy, my oldest daughter, was 5 weeks old. My dad had a previous nursery business and he was exiting because he owned it with someone who was 10 years older than him. And we sort of had this joke where he said, right, I don't want to talk about nurseries for 6 weeks, but in 6 weeks' time, come to me with what you can find, you think you know, or what's for sale, and I'll have a chat with you. So I basically contacted all the agents, because it's a bit like estate agents, you go to people marketing nurseries for business. And I pulled up a load of details and loads of them had houses attached to them and things like that. My dad just kept going, you're going to move there? And I was like, no. And he was like, well, you can't buy one with a house then, because you're paying for the house. And in the end, it sort of became, I think he was sort of trying to teach me to think about the things that I should do from a business point of view. And we found 2 nurseries, one that was owned by a guy in Spain who basically had it as a pension but wasn't really involved in it operationally. And that was in Warrington, which is about 5 miles away from where I lived. And another was operated by the National Day Nurseries Association as a bit like a charitable status in a children's home. So we decided to acquire both of them at the same time. I'd worked in nurseries in the mid-90s, so I understood looking after children. Obviously, by this point, I had my own quite young baby as well.
But that immediately takes you past sort of 70% of the market, right, in terms of most nurseries, a single site.
Yeah, so I think almost deliberately, by acquiring 2 nurseries on day one, we made a deliberate decision to be a group, and that's what we were going to aspire to be.
Yeah.
And they were about 5 miles apart. One was really well run at the time. One was probably run okay, but not as hands-on by the owner. So it sort of enabled us from day one to decide to be a childcare group. And that's what we did.
And where did the word planet come from? Like, what was your thinking about that branding in the early days?
So I think originally I thought it was going to be totally green and all sustainable, and then I realised that all those things cost a fortune, particularly 16 years ago. So it was about what's important and about trying to think about the fact that the future generations really are our future of our planet. And if you get that right and you educate children to the best of their ability and you prepare them as young people ready on that journey for school, you are actually shaping and nurturing something that's really important. And I think one of the things for me that I understood already, and particularly being a first-time parent, was if you get it right, that's a really important thing for that child's resilience for the rest of their lives. And I obviously saw it, and I still do, as a parent. So I wasn't looking at this thinking, how can we cut corners? What can we do? I was looking at this of what did I want for my own baby? Childcare was changing at that point as well, where there was a new education framework coming in from the 1st of September. So the day that we started with this new education framework, and it was ridiculous, really, because half the nurseries that were going at the time understood what they were doing, and half didn't. And I saw that firsthand with one nursery that were ready to go on the 1st of September, and one that we had to get up to speed really quickly with the early years foundation stage.
Okay, that's interesting.
So,
and what was it like? Well, firstly, what makes a good nursery, and what's changed in the 15 years about what you sort of benchmark and look for in a nursery?
So probably not a lot's changed in 15 years about what I'd benchmark. So it's one of those things that when you go in somewhere, and certainly as a parent, you get a feeling of people who care. You get a feeling of people having a real desire to know more about you, to know what your needs are, but also to find out more about your family and what's important to you and how we can make that experience the most important, special one for you and your child, because every child's different and every parent's different. And you see it from, particularly like I was a first-time parent. I have 3 children now, and I joke and say, your first child, you ask so many questions and you know nothing. The third child, I think you probably hand it to a stranger and just say, away you go. So I think it's understanding parents' expectations. And I think it's important that parents look at different options that are available to them. Before I started Kids Planet, I was a very fussy parent. I'd gone around lots and lots of nurseries, and I didn't really get the feeling that I expected to have. And that was just by looking, asking questions, but also listening to what people said when they didn't think you were listening.
Yeah.
Because sometimes you pick up things then and you sort of think, well, hang on, if they say that and I'm here, what's it like really? So I think what makes a good nursery, one, that you feel really happy that your child is safe, loved and cared for, but one that actually understands how to give your child the best start before they go to school. And I think that covers lots and lots of different aspects. But ultimately, children that go to school confident and secure and really settled in themselves, they thrive.
Yeah. And what are some things that parents should perhaps look out for when going around nurseries?
I think it's important that you look at nurseries that carry on investing in what the facilities are, because things do change. It's a bit like things in your own house. You have to replace things and keep them up to date. And I think that's really important. I think it's also making sure that the staff are well trained, kept up to speed with any new thought processes that come in. But also just that parents go around and know what it is that they really want and what's important to them. For me, one of the things, obviously, that I struggled with where I lived was at the time all the nurseries opened at 8 o'clock and closed at 6 o'clock. And I lived in a village where every city was at least an hour's drive away. So if I'd have had a job in an office at that point, I couldn't have dropped a child off in my local village. And that's what I noticed when I went round everywhere. At that point, 16 years ago, most nurseries were 8 till 6, and everyone kept telling me that I needed a nanny.
Yeah.
And I was determined I wasn't going to have a nanny because I wanted them to go to a nursery.
And so was that one of your big differentiators at the beginning then, do you think, opening earlier and finishing later?
Yeah, and I think the reality is parents don't put children in for 12 hours a day or anything like that. But every parent and their working pattern or what they do is different. So by changing our opening times even to 7:30 till 6:30, it just gave that degree of flexibility to parents. We also, in some of our settings, open earlier than that. We will open at 7.
Right, okay. Yeah.
And actually, if you've got an early breakfast meeting or something like that, it means you can do it rather than basically struggling to get to what you need to do. But you tend to find people who drop off earlier, pick up earlier.
Yes.
It isn't that children are in for 12 hours a day or anything like that.
How do you test a market for that in terms of like whether there's going to be demand for opening at 7? Well,
I think a lot of the time settings that we acquire might have more typical sort of 8 till 6.
Yeah.
You do your market research, you understand, you ask parents whether they would have a requirement. You look at what the feedback is from show rounds as well. I think the reality is, unless someone works from home 5 days a week, it's very difficult to say you've got an 8 till 6, because you don't drop children off at nursery like you do in a school.
Yeah.
You go in, you park your car. It might take you 15 minutes to get in and out, and that's if you're quick.
Yeah.
So I think it's one of those things that the reality of people being able to drop at 8 and get into an office is not very common.
Yeah. I can vouch for that, certainly with 3 little ones myself. And you clearly sort of set out with the intent, as you said there, to be a group and to scale, but very much kind of a family business. And your sister is involved as well, right?
Yeah, so my sister's been involved since 2013. So when we started Kids Planet, at the time there was a government initiative that wanted everyone to have an early years teacher in a nursery. So I have an IT degree from a long time ago, pre the internet. And I basically decided to go back to university and do my early years teacher course in the first year. And so I thought it was important that we should have people who understood children's learning and development at the highest level. And that's why I did. My sister is an early years teacher, and she was head of school locally, which was a 3-class entry school. So in 2013, I had a 5-year-old, a 2-year-old, and I was pregnant with my 3rd daughter. And I knew at that point, I think had 7 nurseries, and I knew it was probably getting to the point where I needed someone else. I probably needed lots of different things in the business really at that point, but I definitely needed someone to help me. And Lucy obviously worked in the education sector, but she worked in schools, so had lots of holiday days. So I'd thought she might want to come and join at some point. My sister's 10 years younger than I am. I didn't really want to sort of force her to do it. So I'd spoken to my dad about it, and my dad said, I think your sister might want to join. He said, you need to write a job spec and send it to her and see what you think. And it was random because I had started doing this, and then my sister phoned me and said, you're going to get someone else, aren't you? I want to do it, I'm ready. And so I was like, right, okay. So I shared this job spec with her. And I think what was really useful for me was the fact that she understood early years already, so that was a bonus. So in schools, in reception, it's still the E1FS. So there was that sort of continuation of what she already knew. But also as well, I trusted her implicitly. And to be fair to my sister let me train her up to do things in the way that we'd started at that point. And she has a different skill set to me. Whereas I'd done my teacher training course, I wasn't really a teacher. I was more business focused. Whereas she had a real understanding of learning and development of children and education.
What advice would you give someone for sort of bringing a sibling on and working with them?
So my dad and I are very similar. We can have quite sort of strong, fierce conversations with each other, but still understand each other and not fall out. I think with siblings it can be different. I think siblings could fall out with you faster than your parents might. Yes. So I think for my sister and I, because there's four of us that are siblings, I'm the oldest, we've got 2 brothers in the middle, and she's the youngest. She was like 9 years old when I went to university, or younger than that. So we'd never really fallen out. If anything, I quite liked her, and having had 2 brothers, I was delighted when mum and dad had a girl.
Yeah.
So I always got on really well with her. And even as she sort of grew up, it was a bit like that. Mum and dad used to like pay me to go and look after her on holidays and things like that. So we got on very well. And in fairness to her, probably at times it's a bit irritating having your older sister being quite bossy and being, I'm still sort of quite, I can be quite strong and harsh. And even though we're sisters, I'll say it how it is, not in a way to upset anyone. Yeah. But I think it's funny, our family sort of say, oh, well, do you not know what each other's up to at the weekend? We do a bit, but at work we're colleagues. And even though we're sisters, we don't spend all our lives chatting about family-related things. We talk about work.
Yeah.
But I think one of the things that is important if you can find and make it work as siblings in a business is you have this really sort of unwavering focus and determination to do the right thing for each other. And I think that's the thing. I think, of course you can trust all your colleagues in a company, of course you can. But very early on, particularly with childcare, it was hard to put that trust in someone else.
Yes.
And I still, nearly 16 years later, I'm a bit of a control freak at times, but I did trust Lucy and do trust her.
And you can trust them quicker as well.
Yeah, yeah.
And then at sort of 2013, around that time, you started thinking about sort of professionalising the business in some ways in terms of I know you take slight kind of umbrage at the term sort of professionalising perhaps, but then that's when you started looking for external investment.
So before that, so we had like what are board meetings, but probably more casually than the formal structure that we have now. We brought in an FD somewhere around sort of, I think 2014, and decided at that point we were going to start having more formalised board meetings and doing it in a way, if we were going to bring investment in, that it wasn't all suddenly overnight a massive change. And we banked with Barclays, and Barclays suggested BGF. At that point, we'd built a number of nurseries and had a number of sites that we were going to develop ourselves. But obviously, in terms of our 5-year plan, that was taking much longer to do.
Yeah.
My dad at that point was, I don't know, probably about 60, and he'd put quite a lot of his own personal money into the business as well. So he decided to take some money off the table. I think as much because my mum was probably quite cross with him that he put all the money he'd got out from a previous business into the new one. And by taking that investment from BGF, at that point that was 2016, so we had 16 nurseries. It meant that we could accelerate that plan.
Yes.
And we had obviously more funds available to grow and acquire.
And why do you think Barclays recommended BGF?
Because they were light touch and because they would invest in the entrepreneur and they would let us run the business. And I think they probably recognised that my dad and I were quite strong characters. And that's exactly what we wanted in terms of investment. And in fairness, it was exactly what we expected. Like it was different.
Yeah.
But
how did it? What do you mean by light touch?
I suppose it was that we had a clear business plan of what we wanted to achieve and how we wanted to succeed. And as I'm not naive, I know with private equity, the reality of this is if you've got a business plan and you achieve it, everyone's really happy with you. And they keep saying, well done. And that's ultimately what we did. We were delivering what we promised to deliver. And because of that, they let us make the decisions and grow at sort of the pace that we wanted to. And at times, probably they thought we were quite quick to grow.
Yeah.
But I think also as well, they were very supportive. There was never anything that we ever wanted to do that we didn't do. I think actually to start with, it was funny because we probably made decisions much faster than when it was my dad and I.
Yeah.
Because when BGF came in, they said, if Claire thinks it's a good idea, let's do it. And I could see my dad glaring, thinking we would have had about a year of not spending this money if it had been down to me. So
the accountability actually sort of led to faster growth.
Yeah, and I think the other thing as well, in fairness really, was that after I'd had Tilly, my youngest daughter, I made a real effort as well to promote our business, so that I did quite a lot of public things and networking to make people aware of the brand of Kids Planet, not just on a business forum, but also within the early years sector with like the Department for Education, with Ofsted. And I think those things, there's a point in any business when you get to a certain size that as a chief exec, your role isn't just about the day-to-day managing of what you do in your business.
Yeah.
You have to sort of think a bit beyond it and a bit how everything you do promotes that business. And I think that's what as I managed to start to build an infrastructure around me that supported aspects of the business, it enabled me to have more time to do that. And it also wasn't having any more children, which obviously would take a lot of time.
Yeah, because right at the beginning, you're a new mum, you've opened 2 nurseries, and you're also sort of upskilling yourself on childcare knowledge by doing a degree as well, right?
And I was in theory managing one of those nurseries for the first year.
Yeah.
So I went to our first nursery I used to be there at 7:15 every morning, and I didn't leave till the last child left every day. So I used to have to sing to my poor 9-month-old baby, so my dad didn't kill me when I got home and say she's been asleep for 20 minutes in the car. Because we all know if you've got a young child that that happens, it's a game changer for your whole night. So, but I think that was really important. And when I look back, yes, there were a lot of crazy hours that I worked in that first year. But I learned everything, and I saw everything, and I dealt with parents, and I dealt with staff. So I'd obviously been used to managing teams before, but I was less customer facing before in the role that I had.
Yeah, I get that. And what skills did you think at that point and that growing bit when you're taking the capital on, well, I'm really going to have to upskill in myself now? So you talk about going to events and kind of being the public face much more of it. Did you sort of go through like any sort of specific training on that kind of thing, or?
No, not really. I suppose that was prior to taking investment. No, I think the reality is, I'd love to say it was totally equal now, but even more so, 11 years ago, there were less females in sort of business environments. And I made some good connections with people who, when you have judging panels and things like that, they tried to make it more fair and more inclusive. And obviously, I had a growing business and quite a good story at that time. So I took a lot of those opportunities, and also quite like networking events. I found it interesting talking to other people about their businesses, because I think one of the things that you really understand is, yes, your sector is your own, and it's really important that you understand what you do, but everyone has the same challenges really in businesses.
Yeah.
And actually getting different people's perspective on things is really interesting.
And what you went to get another couple of rounds of funding from BGF as well. And first time you just looked at BGF. When the second and third times, were there other things that you were looking for? How did your evolution as a family business change when approaching those second and third rounds?
So we did 2 follow-on investments with BGF after the first one, and there was no consideration at that point of changing or moving to someone else. I think one of the things that changed really was in 2020 we made an acquisition just prior to COVID, and then obviously COVID hit in March 2020, and it was almost like, well, the same in all sectors. No one could do any deals. No one knew what the world really looked like. But what suddenly started to happen as we got to sort of December 2020, January 21, was it was really clear that particularly in our sector, because care was were sectors that were open.
Yeah.
So we were dealing during COVID. We had at that point we had 52 nurseries. We kept 26 of them open even throughout the whole process, because we had a lot of parents who were key workers, so they still needed childcare. And so we were dealing with like live cases of COVID, where if you looked at someone, you were isolated for 10 days, which you can imagine in a nursery, social distancing is a really great thing to do. It was like chaotic really when you look back. But I think because it was so like that, it had actually frightened a lot of people in the sector, and you could suddenly see that there was this mass exit of people who had got to an age. A lot of nurseries opened in the mid-80s, sort of early 90s, and many of those people were probably coming up to the stage where they might be considering their own options anyway, in terms of retirement and things like that, if they'd opened them with their own children. So suddenly lots of opportunities were coming to market, and there were groups that we'd viewed prior to COVID that we'd all sort of kept in touch with, that suddenly were saying, no, we definitely want to exit now. So that sort of year of March 21 sort of time, it suddenly became clear that if you wanted to grow, now was the time to really grow and look at opportunities there in terms of investment. And if you didn't, other people were going to do it and you would get left behind. The other thing as well was we tendered for 5 nurseries at Oxford University, and obviously suddenly we were quite far away from the northwest of England, and we won that tender and started operating those nurseries in July 21. Right. So it automatically catapulted us into a point where actually geographically, let's start growing and continue with this, and that's what we did.
Where were the furthest points now then?
So at that point in 21, we had 5 in Oxford, Blackpool would have been the north, a random nursery at that time in Nottingham.
Okay.
We had 5 in Chesterfield. So it was all a bit sort of sporadic. And for us, it had always been about growing through single site acquisitions or opening settings or small groups. So we strategically decided to sort of start coming down from the north and across. So sort of over that period of time, it was trying to grow. So I always try to think back to how I got to with 7 nurseries. And if that was my sort of creaking point, that's really sort of 7 to 8 is what we have as an area manager.
Yes.
Managing in terms of a cluster. So we try to strategically build clusters. So even when I worked in the pharmaceutical industry, the furthest person away from me probably saw me the least.
Yeah.
So if you have someone more local to managing clusters, it means they get that proper support and that contact properly.
That's really interesting. And that's the way it sort of breaks down. They're doing 7 or 8 kind of nurseries each.
And I think the other thing as well was that obviously the work that I'd done in terms of public speaking in our sector, I'd created a brand that people knew who we were, even if it wasn't in the Northwest. So actually we get still over 1/3 of our acquisitions direct.
Oh, right.
Through LinkedIn or email or things like that, because people know what we're about and what our values as a company are.
Yeah.
And I think the other thing is as well, for people when they look to retire or look to leave the sector, they want to make sure that they pass it on to someone that cares.
Yeah. It's very
doesn't
emotional.
Just see it as a sort of numbers game or a business, someone who actually cares about childcare.
Yeah. And so what is the process for these kind of acquisitions and the growth then? So you get quite a lot of inbound direct, you were saying. Then does it go to an investment committee or,
So before an investment committee, we would do all our own sort of due diligence really by visiting, talking to the owners, going through everything from finding out information about their childcare, finding out information about their people processes, the finance processes, payroll, all those kind of things. And we obviously, we make an offer based on what we see in terms of the value of the business from the accounts and things like that. But obviously it's all then underpinned by that and that due diligence. And then we pull together a paper that's signed off by our investors.
Yeah. No, it's interesting to see how it kind of works.
But we probably get at least 100 opportunities a month.
Right.
And probably only look at 10% of them at best.
Yeah.
So there's lots that we dismiss straight away. That might be either too small, might be the geographical location that at this moment in time it's not for us.
Yeah.
Lots of different.
Yeah, you don't want one in Cornwall or something like that.
Yeah, unless you were suddenly decided to acquire a group in that area.
Yeah. So what kind of things when you're looking at the podcast called BGF Good Growth Podcast, how do you define good growth in the childcare sector? What are the kind of metrics that you look at? We've talked a lot about kind of like nursery site numbers, but what are the other kind of growth metrics that you're looking at?
So I think good growth metrics and sort of scaling up are the same whether it's a nursery business or any business. I think it's about looking at what are the important aspects to make your business operate properly, and have you got the right people in place to grow and develop those teams. And I think that's something that's really important. I think people sometimes struggle for ages doing things, and then it gets to breaking point where they really should have invested in their support structure and their head office team faster. I think we've been good at looking at what are those points in time and how can we invest in people and what do we need to make sure that this continues to be a success. And I think sometimes people, particularly founder-led organisations, are frightened to relinquish control.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes you end up doing far too many things for too long. And I think that's really important that you recognise that. There were things that probably I held on to doing for longer than I should have done, but I realised quite quickly. And I think you have to bring in expertise that supports a growing business and supports it be able to do that.
Yeah. What were some sort of reflections that you have on the way of perhaps when you grew too quickly in terms of maybe taking or perhaps biting off a bigger chunk than you'd sort of managed? And at the other end, when could you have had more confidence and tried to grow quicker?
I think one of the most difficult times was we made an acquisition in January 2020, which was for us quite a big acquisition. So we suddenly ended up with 2 head offices.
Right.
And we were basically trying to work out how to put everyone together. And then literally about 6 weeks after we'd done that deal, I was sending everyone home to say, don't come in the office anymore. So it was a bit like, oh, this is crazy, because we were trying to sort of be really respectful and do it in a way of observing. And then after 3 months, take a view on how it would all knit together. But obviously then everyone got sent home and had to work from home and the world changed. So I think that sort of period of time, there were probably over that 18-month period, it became evident there were roles missing in our business. Like we didn't have a HR director at that point in time. Yeah. And I was far too heavily involved in everything around our people strategy. Like even like parents who were in our nursery that knew me joked and said, I was waiting for your weekly COVID bulletin, because it was a bit like, like the BBC News. Yeah. I'd tell them what the latest doom was about COVID, but it was all coming from me because we didn't really have anyone else who could do that at that point in time. So I think probably during that period it became evident that probably we needed a better people function to support the business. I think at different times as well, it's also not being frightened of having people that would challenge the business around you. I think sometimes it's easy to have everyone to just go, and we'll just do it the way you like doing it and grow like that. Whereas actually you get to a certain size and you think, well, do you know what? I've used a lot of my ideas up over 16 years. Come and bring some new ideas or new suggestions about how we can do or make things differently. And I think it's really important as a CEO that you don't sit there sort of stifling your business by not enabling others to come up with ideas, because actually people often have really good ideas and they might need a bit of help with support or implementation of how to get there. But there's definite things that aren't mine. I'd love to take credit for them in terms of being my ideas, but they're not, that have improved our business over the last 18 months. And also as well, it's hard in childcare because most people that go to work in a nursery in the first place do so because they love looking after children. And then if you're really good at doing that, you end up being a manager. And then you don't mind the children day to day anymore. You then mind the team and the parents. And actually the skills that you suddenly expected to use are not the skills that you went into childcare for. So I think one of the things that's been really sort of interesting we've tried to do over time is to give people the training and understanding of budgets and things like that, because why would you know what budgets were if you'd never been given a budget before? And also training people on how to manage people, because like nursery managers are often like parents to a lot of our team. Yeah. And a lot of our younger team members, their parents will say, go into work, they'll sort it out for you if they've got a problem. So it is a bit like a family, individual families in each of the nurseries.
Yes, I can see that. And one of the interesting things is you've now, like, there's been a bit of a challenge around childcare in terms of the pipeline of talent going into it and it's seen as a profession. You've now started training your own apprentices and also doing that as a provider for other nurseries as well. Talk to us about the the journey of that?
Yeah, so many years ago, I was an apprentice in the 90s when I worked in a nursery, and I had first-hand experience at being enrolled in a college where your tutor might not come on the day they were meant to come and assess you and mark your coursework or whatever. And what astounded me, sort of rolling on sort of 15 years from that, was that not a lot had changed when we started in early years. Yeah. So it was very much who you signed up for your apprenticeship with as to how successful you were. Partly, some of it was down to you, but some of it was down to also the training provider as well. And also, there's been lots of legislation that's changed over the years in nurseries, and it became a less attractive thing for people to do in colleges. So the only way really to get people trained was to do it within the workplace. So in 2018, we became a levy payer. And at that point, it also was clear that people didn't understand as training providers if they had the levy contract or the non-levy
Just
contract.
explain to us the levy.
So a business is over a certain size, pay into a fund, which you can draw on for training and development for your team. If you don't spend your levy, it gets lost after a 2-year period.
Yeah.
So you have lots of businesses who can't use the levy for whatever reason that actually can transfer their levy to other people as well.
Yeah.
So you often see that with big supermarkets or governments or local authorities where they'll share their levy with other people to make use of it. So we decided to start to train our own colleagues because it meant that we could induct and train them at the same time. And so we did that from 2018. In March the 9th, 2020, we became a main provider. That was a shocking time to become a main provider because obviously everyone had been told to go home. So it wasn't an ideal time to start going out and sort of selling your services to the wider world. But what we did do, which was in September 2020, we decided to start a cohort of 250 apprentices because we could tell that with having to isolate and send people home in bubbles, that if we didn't have more workforce, we would never be able to continue to operate.
Yeah.
Because the problem in nurseries was you could have been in on a Monday or Tuesday, and so all the staff in the room had been sent home, but you might only do a Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. So those parents wanted still to send their children because they weren't isolated. So the whole thing was crazy. But so we took on 250 apprentices at a time as well where obviously no one else was recruiting.
Yeah.
Because most sectors weren't open. And that was sort of the start of our big numbers. We have now about 550 to 600 apprentices across our business. They range from level 2 up to sort of postgraduate courses. But we take on, for me, I think that you can sit and moan about the challenges you face, or you can find solutions to them. And in our sector, there wasn't enough qualified level 3s coming through. And so you have to create your own. And so we do 2 things. We take on what people would see as traditional apprentices, which are your school leavers. And we also have cohorts of people who are apprentices, but they're called unqualified. So they're paid living wage.
Yeah.
And they are people who might decide to have a change in career. And they're actually from lots of different age groups. And they come and do that on a training salary as the minimum wage or the living wage, and then get paid when they become qualified on our qualified rates.
And having gone through a career change yourself pretty drastically as well, what are the common traits you see in those career changes?
I think often it's people who've had their own children, the children have gone to school, or people who've just got to a point where they might have worked in, I don't know, they could have worked in retail or hospitality and they want something different.
Yeah.
But I think the thing with childcare, you have to be passionate. You have to like children a lot. They're 2 important factors. But also to be quite hardworking. It is quite a physical job.
Yes.
So that's one of the things that I think, and I think obviously I'm very conscious we employ a lot of females. Like we have the opposite to the rest of the world.
Yeah.
We try and attract more men into our sector rather than females. And I'm very conscious that lots of females in their sort of mid-40s start to leave as well.
Yeah.
And part of that is that women go through changes as they get older. And I think it's really important. Like, the reality is, it's like you have things at both spectrums. You get to your mid-40s, you have children who are teenagers who can be quite mean and quite demanding. You also probably have ageing parents at that point who you're having to look after. And I think there's lots of sort of pressures that are put on people and their families that actually, as employers, we need to be more supportive with, because often it's a period of time that people sort of get through and just need a bit of help.
Yeah. And when do you think that, because people are sort of quite aware, I think, of when people become new parents and sort of changes around that. But I think you touched on something interesting there around, there are life changes at lots of different decades in people's lives. Like, what changes have you brought in as a company to try and help with that sort of 40-year midlife shift, I suppose?
So we employ a wellbeing manager who basically oversees our whole wellbeing strategy for the company. So one of the things that was really important to me as we grew was, some people are great at doing these kind of things automatically, and others less so. So I wanted to make sure it was consistent and that it was controlled and managed, so that you didn't have someone in, I don't know, Newcastle doing one thing and someone in Oxford thinking, oh, that's terrible, we never do any of that kind of thing. So it's a consistent approach. It's also working with our people team to make sure that we have, we've looked a lot at our employee benefits over the last 18 months, particularly around enhanced maternity leave, paternity leave, adoption leave, fertility leave, those kind of things, to make sure that we give the right support to colleagues, but also as well with things like things that are in our gift, childcare discounts, to make sure that we can make it affordable for people to return to work, which obviously now help more so with what the government's doing as well.
Yes.
But it's also trying to make sure that you don't lose really good people. And the other thing we've invested in a lot, we increased our annual leave entitlement by 25%.
So what is it now then?
It's 25 days a year, and typically in care, it would be 20 plus bank holidays. So, and I think that's important, because you're a long time at work and you do need R&R.
So completely. And we'll come on to the government stuff, and we'll do that right at the end if that's all right. But what's fertility leave, our interest?
Well, it's to basically make sure people can go to appointments and to have time off to go and do whatever they need to do, and feel that they can do that in a confidential way.
Yeah. Okay. I've not come across that before, but makes a lot of sense. Just back to the BGF side of things, you said they were light touch and so on. Is there a particular case study where they were particularly helpful on a problem that you went to them with?
I think particularly where BGF were the most supportive was during COVID. And they were always supportive, but immediately on day one, like obviously for us at that point, we had 2,500 colleagues, and suddenly, I don't know, what was it? Something ridiculous, like 92% of our parents were not going to be sending their children to nurseries. And we took the decision before furlough was announced to do two things, which was a bit crazy, really. We said we wouldn't charge any parents who weren't able to attend straight away, because all parents wanted to know in March, as soon as Boris had said go home, was, am I still going to be billed for nursery? And so you had a lot of parents like sort of demanding as though you knew the answer and had a crystal ball. But you then had 2,500 people who were saying, well, hang on, am I going to be paid? Because if I'm not going to be paid, so very quickly...
You can't do both. Right?
So very quickly you could see, we luckily had cash flows that meant we could do both for certainly a couple of months.
Okay.
Luckily, obviously, furlough helped everyone out in terms of staff support and side of things. But BGF immediately said before those things came up, we have money and resource available that if you need extra financial support, we can arrange.
Gosh, that must have been
but I think that I felt very strongly about COVID, that COVID was a bit like a period of time where people who behaved in the right way, people would remember that. Mm-hmm. And I think that was really important. I'm not sure everyone remembers it as clearly anymore 4 years down the road. But at that time, I think particularly, people wanted to be reassured at a time when it was very, very difficult. And I think that's where it was important that we showed to do the right thing.
I think the pandemic at points feels like a bad dream that we're trying to box off quite a lot of. But I think there is a lot to be said for, in a few years, we might look back as well, to be a bit more fondness of it. What sort of continues to drive you now, sort of 16 years on from starting the business, what's you've clearly been on this amazing journey you've talked us through, and like you've expanded so much. Like, how do you sort of set yourself new goals?
I think, I'm clearly quite sad, and I obviously like work, and I always have like work no matter what. I've had 3 proper jobs since I left university, and all of them I really enjoyed. And if I'm going to do something, I throw my heart and soul into it. I think the other thing is that as cheesy as it sounds, I do believe that we make a real difference to children with what we do each day. And I like to spread that and grow it. I think for me, there's different things like moving into new geographical areas. That's quite exciting. All joking aside, we did an acquisition in Wales. Wales is a different way of, the childcare operates totally differently in Wales to the way that it does in England. So that's almost demonstrated to start with, that we can actually grow in another area. We're going to do bolt-on acquisitions in Wales coming up. And for me, the excitement really is about international growth and how we could grow that further as well.
Oh, right. So you're expanding overseas.
So I think over the next sort of 2 years plus, that would be a natural thing to do.
Where do you think you go first?
I don't know. It depends what opportunity. Like, you wouldn't obviously buy one nursery in one country. I suppose it depends what kind of sort of small group acquisitions come up. I think one of the places that's really interesting in particular is the USA, in the fact that their market for childcare has been massively disrupted post-COVID. People returning to working in offices in America is very different to...
How so?
More people still work from home, and a lot of their nurseries were built around businesses. So actually now you're having loads of new houses being built in areas, and there just isn't adequate childcare provision. We had parents from one of our nurseries who contacted me directly saying, please can you open a kids planet in here? And I was like, it might be a difficult one, just one to start with. But they were saying that they are really shocked, first of all, at the differences in terms of what you get in a nursery and how it's not the same standards that you have in the UK. And also that people got 18-month waiting lists.
Wow. Okay.
So people cannot get children into nurseries. And if they can, it's maybe ones that they wouldn't have chosen.
And what else? What else is different in America? And
so I think obviously England in the early years foundation stage is seen internationally as being like the gold standard of what happens in nurseries and how it's been really thought out with children's stages of development. I'm not saying that other countries don't have some kind of theories about what they do, but a lot of it tends to be a bit more old-fashioned and a bit more like... So if you go particularly to like the UAE or anywhere like that, everybody wants EYFS nurseries. So it's really seen as sort of a leading...
Because we've always been quite good at that in terms of like global education, right? We've got top 5 universities like in the world here and so on, but we don't necessarily sort of think of ourselves as much at the early kind of years. It is really interesting you talking about becoming a kind of massive modern day export potentially. So
and I think that more and more internationally we are seen as what we do in nurseries being very, very effective. I think there's other countries as well that also have like Iceland and places that have a lot of outdoor type provision that's very different to ours. Now that's quite interesting as well. But we've tried to blend what we do with the EYFS with our outdoor approach to early years as well. And our nurseries, you can go in any of our nurseries, and whilst they all look individual from the outside, you get a real sense of what our ethos and our quality is inside across all of them.
So that's really interesting. What are the other ways that childcare and the pandemic's impacted it here? I mean, you say that in the US. One of the things that you said before was that that we had in pre-chat was that you used to have 6 sessions on average, so that's like morning or afternoons, and that's now dropped to 4.5. I thought it was quite interesting in the way that the world
So I think that's it. To 6 sessions was from 2008, not pre the pandemic. So I think over time, what you've seen is as the cost of childcare has gone up, parents have tried to have a blend of either using nurseries or using grandparents or doing whatever they do. And obviously one of the things with the support that's now coming from the government in terms of funded childcare, it will mean that it's like a subsidy for parents in terms of making it more cost effective. And I wonder whether we'll see a change of, like we have some nurseries where there's quite a lot of full-time children, but they tend to be in our university nurseries. And that's because they wouldn't have family around them. They might work full-time.
Yeah.
So you see sort of more full-time children, whereas 30 years ago, everybody who went to a nursery was full-time. So obviously there are parts to that there was no flexible working. You didn't come back after maternity leave and put in flexible requests. Those kind of things where forget it, go. You come back full time.
That's your flexible request.
That's it. So obviously that's changed things. But I think what we'll see is possibly people working more days because it's more affordable to do so with childcare.
Yeah.
For some people, they sort of struggle through where they pay in early years, and then their children go to school and they find a way around and decide what they want to do there.
That flexibility has become more and more important.
Yeah.
What do you make of the changes the government has announced? I mean, it's interesting there. You talk about the UK being kind of like a world leader in early childcare, but at the same time, the costs of it have got exponentially a lot more people's salaries and so on. And the government is sort of beginning to realise this, and lots of people leaving the workforce because of childcare issues and so on. Government has announced a kind of big expansion of state subsidies into the childcare sector. What do you make of what's happening there at the moment?
I think it's great. I think it's slightly misleading. I think the word free is just totally misleading to parents because it isn't free. What the government is investing in is funded hours. It doesn't cover any of the actual other costs that nurseries have for delivering early years. So things like meals, consumables, everything, apart from just turning up and being in the building and an adult.
Yeah.
It doesn't cost any, it doesn't cover any of that. I also think the other thing that's quite misleading is that it's for 38 weeks of the year, not 52. And nurseries are open for 52 weeks of the year. So you've got parents coming saying, oh, I'm going to have 15 hours a week. And it's like, well, actually, it's 11 because it's stretched over 52 weeks of the year.
Yeah.
And the same will be when it's 30 hours, it'll be 22. But obviously for parents, that means their bills are consistent. Otherwise, you'd have 38 weeks of the year at much cheaper bills. And then Christmas and summertime, big invoices coming through. So I think some of that's a bit misleading. I think it's an amazing thing to do for families. I think it will pay for itself in 2 to 3 years with the number of people that are talking about coming back into the workforce. Well, if you imagine that back in the economy, it sort of self-pays itself then. But I think the main thing really is that we need a government that's got a long-term strategy. Some of these things are announced as vote winners. Yeah. And that's fine, but have the proper thought process behind it. And obviously we started offering out the new 15 hours to 2-year-olds on Tuesday last week. It's been okay. I think the thing that's a real worry is that the education minister has announced that she thinks we need an extra 40,000 people to cover the extra demand in our sector. Well, that's great. Where are those people coming from, and what can we do quickly to support that? Because I think that's one of the things that's an issue here, is this has been a sector that people have decided to leave for many years. Brexit, COVID did not help with that in terms of our workforce. Because if you imagine, with Brexit in particular, retail and hospitality have lost people who would have done those jobs. And you've now got everyone fighting against each other in terms of what they pay colleagues to cover those jobs, which obviously that impacts us. I also think as well, the other problem is we cannot work from home in nurseries. Yeah. Because AI and all kinds of things can do anything that they want to do, but the reality is you're not going to remotely start minding children and you need to be in work.
No, exactly. I wasn't going to ask about AI in this episode. But what do you think the government's doing a good job of it? What could be better?
I think there's lots of. I think they are. I think they are listening. I think there's more they need to do to make sure this is a success.
What more do they need to do?
I think they need to invest more in the workforce strategy. I think they need to look at how that money is passed from central government to local authorities, and to make sure that providers get the money that's actually given, rather than having it top sliced, which often happens. The problem is
top sliced by who then?
By local authorities. Like, obviously it's no secret some local authorities are in more difficult situations than others. And so there are elements where the money that you get given by the Department for Education isn't ring-fenced in early years, whereas it is in schools, so they should ring-fence the money. Okay. We get different rates from every local authority, so there's about 155. Every single one has a different rate. And that doesn't just mean whether you're in London or whether you're in Manchester. We could have Warrington and Wigan sat right next to each other with different rates by quite a lot.
How much do the rates vary then?
Well, the 3 and 4 year rates can vary by about £1 an hour per child.
Right. Okay. Yeah. It sounds a lot.
It is a lot. And obviously the rates, the problem is that for a long time, the 3 and 4 year funding that providers have had has been underfunded and not linked to living wage, inflation and things like that, which obviously meant that providers have had to find ways to make it work. The new funding that's coming out is the rates are better.
Yeah.
And they have looked at this with more up-to-date data. But this is a sector that's been struggling in many ways for quite a long time. And that's one of the issues, really.
You touched on their sort of Brexit pandemic. As a sort of final question, I wanted to ask about how you actually started the business, as you said, in the first week of September 2008, which was also not exactly a calm time. It's like financial public markets. What would you go back and tell yourself now? And why do you think that actually it was a good time to start a business?
Well, to be fair, whether it was a bad or a good time, I had no choice because I'd taken voluntary redundancy and I needed a job. So I had to get on and do it. I think it was a good time in terms of the fact that obviously it was a difficult time for some people financially, and obviously there were opportunities there that were probably less money than they would have been had it not been that period of time. We acquired property that we converted during that time, which would have been doubled within a few years in terms of, buying a building and converting it. So there was lots of opportunity that we were able to sort of pick up on. Local authorities were selling lots of buildings at those times because they were older buildings that were too expensive for them to operate, and they built new buildings. So we found sites that were quite big sites at that point and were able to build new nurseries on them. I think the other thing as well is, it was interesting really, when I think back to 2008, actually childcare occupancy was quite high.
Yeah.
Because I think there was a sense where people were really worried about losing both incomes. So you actually saw more families having 2 parents who went back to work. And I think that was because obviously more people were being made redundant, that if you'd bought a house on a salary, you needed a salary still to be coming in. So I think actually in nurseries, and also that was under the previous Labour government, I think they were really supportive with trying to get people back into work at that point, with back to work schemes and supporting the cost of childcare to people who earn less. That was significantly supported during that time.
Are there any other final thoughts on the future of childcare?
No, I think obviously it will continue to grow, and obviously if there's all these new people returning to work, there will be much bigger demand.
Yeah.
I think that's one of the other things that as childcare providers there needs to be proper planning for, because I worry that if more parents take more sessions, there won't be the places for all these new families coming through.
Yeah.
And I think obviously when I talk to the DFE about this, I say they need to look at ways to fast track if someone wants to open a nursery, or if they have buildings that they could do. how they're going to support them to do that in terms of money, because everyone's not just sat there with like savings waiting to start opening new nurseries, but also how they can make the process easier with planning consents and things like that, and like reduce red tape. Because from September 25, 9 months and above will all get 30 funded hours.
And that's going to put quite a bit of pressure on.
And we can see already a lot of the PR and the media attention that's been brought into what's happening is actually making parents be a lot more organised. So we've got way more bookings in for 2025 than we'd normally have, with parents being organised, because I think everyone's seeing this media hype about demand for places, that it's making people think, well, I'm not going to sit around and not get my place booked in. I'm going to book in advance. So I think that's obviously, for nurseries, that's good in some ways, because we can see and forecast and plan for what we need from a staffing point of view. But if everyone doesn't do that, there's going to be a lot of disappointed people.
Right. Well, that's quite a way to end. Claire, thanks so much. That's been really insightful on so many levels.